My sister lied about me for 10 years, but on her wedding day, the truth exploded and her whole story fell apart. In Kigali, Rwanda, 29-year-old Keza Murembe has always been the quiet, dependable one. She works as a talented graphic designer, keeps to herself, and avoids drama as much as she can. People who meet her describe her as soft-spoken but strong, the kind of woman who thinks before she reacts. But for nearly 10 years, her older sister, Solange, has told a very different story about her. Solange has spent years convincing their extended family that Keza is jealous of her, that she causes trouble, that she's irresponsible and dramatic. And because Keza never defends herself, many people started to believe Solange. Keza always hoped the truth would reveal itself someday, so she stayed silent, even when it hurt. Then one afternoon, something happened that Keza couldn't ignore. Solange's wedding invitations were being delivered all around the family, but nothing arrived for Keza. At first, she thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the courier missed her house. But when she heard distant relatives whispering that she had been left out on purpose because she was too toxic and unpredictable, her heart sank. It felt like someone had punched her in the chest. Keza sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, trying to understand how her own sister could erase her from such an important moment. For the first time in her life, something inside her shifted, almost like a quiet strength waking up. She wasn't angry yet, but she felt a clear, sharp truth forming inside her. This wasn't just hurtful. It was the final line she couldn't let Solange cross. And in that moment, Keza knew deep down that the days of staying silent were coming to an end. When Keza finally let herself think about the past, it felt like opening a door she had kept shut for years. Every memory came back slowly, clearly, and painfully. She remembered how everything started with small things, tiny mistakes she made that any normal sister would laugh about or forget. But Solange never forgot. Instead, she twisted those moments into dramatic stories that made Keza look careless or jealous. There was the time Keza accidentally broke Solange's favorite earrings when she was a teenager. To Solange, that became a dramatic tale about Keza destroying her things out of envy. Or the time Keza came home late from a school trip. Solange told everyone Keza had been sneaking out with boys. Keza tried to explain the truth, but her voice always felt too small next to Solange's loud confidence. As they grew older, the lies didn't stop. They grew with them. Keza remembered losing friends because Solange would whisper that Keza talked behind their backs. She remembered watching people distance themselves without ever telling her why. And the most painful part was how Solange knew exactly what she was doing. She would smile sweetly in front of their parents, acting like the responsible, caring older sister, while doing things that slowly pushed Keza into a corner. Then there was the moment Keza would never forget, the award-winning design project. Keza had stayed up for nights, sketching, editing, and polishing a layout for a major competition. The morning it was due, Solange accidentally submitted it under her own name. She won first place. The family praised her for weeks. Keza never said a word. She was too tired to argue, too used to being blamed, too afraid of being called jealous again. And Solange took full advantage of it. Looking back, Keza realized her silence had become Solange's biggest weapon. Because Keza never defended herself, Solange's stories became the truth. She played the obedient daughter, the disciplined student, the hardworking woman. It was a role she mastered perfectly. No one questioned her, not their parents, not the relatives, not even the neighbors. And now, not even her fiancé. Emmanuel Ndeweo believed every word Solange had ever said about Keza. He thought Keza was dramatic, unstable, and difficult. He never questioned why he had never actually spoken to Keza himself. He simply trusted the picture Solange painted, one where she was the hero and Keza was the villain. Sitting alone in her room, Keza felt something heavy settle in her chest. It wasn't just that Solange lied. It was that she had built an entire identity from those lies. She used them to control how people saw her, to make herself look kind and innocent while pushing Keza into the shadows. For the first time, Keza understood the full truth. Solange didn't just damage her reputation. She depended on those lies to protect her own. And now Keza wondered what would happen when those lies finally met the real world. A week before the wedding, when Kigali was buzzing with excitement and everyone seemed to be talking about Solange's big day, Keza's phone lit up with a message. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the moment she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. It was a long text from Emmanuel's aunt, a message clearly not meant for her. It said, "Why is the younger sister not invited? Everyone says she's the kind one. Something feels wrong here." For a moment, Keza just stared at the screen, unable to move. No one had ever openly questioned Solange's behavior before. No one had ever looked past the stories, the drama, the whispered lies. And certainly no one from Emmanuel's family had ever reached out to her, accidentally or not. She reread the message several times. Her heart felt strangely warm, almost relieved. It was the first time in years that someone had described her as the kind one. It was such a simple phrase, yet it cracked something open inside her. After so long being painted as the problem, it felt like someone had finally seen her, truly seen her. At first, she thought about ignoring it. She didn't want to cause trouble for the aunt, who clearly sent it by mistake. But the more she sat with the message, the more it stirred something powerful inside her. If even one person doubted Solange's stories, what about others? What if people had been quietly wondering all along? Keza typed a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she simply replied, "I think this message wasn't meant for me, but thank you." The aunt didn't respond after that, probably too embarrassed. But Keza didn't mind. The damage was already done, in a good way. That one mistaken message had shaken the foundation Solange had built for years. For the first time, Keza felt like she didn't have to hide anymore. That night, she sat on her balcony, feeling the cool Kigali breeze brush against her skin. The city lights looked softer than usual, almost comforting. And as she breathed deeply, she made a quiet decision, one that shocked even her. She would go to the wedding, not to fight, not to expose anyone, not to embarrass Solange, but because she was tired of being erased. She was tired of shrinking so others could stretch. She was tired of living like a ghost in her own family's story. She wanted to show up simply as herself. No explanations, no apologies, no fear. She pictured walking into the venue with her head held high. She imagined the looks, the whispers, the surprise. But strangely, none of that scared her anymore. For the first time in her life, Keza wasn't avoiding the storm. She was walking straight into it, not to create chaos, but to finally reclaim her place in the room. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright Kigali sunshine, the kind that made every color in the city look sharper and more alive. The grand church was already packed with guests, families greeting each other, children dressed in their best outfits, music filling the air, and photographers moving around capturing every moment. It was the kind of day that felt almost too perfect. Solange stood near the altar, glowing in her custom-made kitenge gown. The dress shimmered with gold and deep blue patterns, a design clearly chosen to make her the center of attention. She held her bouquet tightly, smiling confidently as guests admired her beauty. This was her big day, and she had planned every detail for months. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for what happened next. The church doors opened again, and a soft murmur rippled through the room. Heads slowly turned, eyes widened. Whispering began instantly, spreading from one row to the next like wind through grass. "Isn't that Keza?" someone whispered. "But she looks so respectable." Keza walked in calmly, wearing a simple but elegant dress in soft earth tone. She carried herself with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove, her chin lifted just enough to show confidence but not pride. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup light but beautiful. She looked peaceful, almost glowing, and that alone shocked people. They had heard so many stories about her. They had been told she was the unstable one, the dramatic one, the jealous sister who would ruin anything she touched. But the woman walking down the aisle toward a seat in the back looked nothing like the monster they had been warned about. She looked like someone who didn't belong in the shadows. Solange saw her, and in that moment, the mask she had carefully worn for years cracked. Her eyes widened, her smile faltered, the color drained from her face, even under the flawless makeup. Emmanuel, standing at the front, noticed the sudden tension and frowned slightly, confused. Keza didn't look at Solange directly, but she felt the shock in the room. She felt the shift. She felt something powerful move in the air. And for the first time in her life, she understood the truth with painful clarity. Solange's lies only worked when Keza stayed invisible. Her silence had allowed Solange to shape the narrative. Her absence had given Solange the freedom to create any version of her she wanted. But now Keza was here, real, present, undeniable. She sat quietly in the last row, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her heartbeat steady. She wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to expose anyone. She was simply here to exist, boldly, confidently, without apology. And that alone was enough to make Solange panic. After the ceremony, the wedding party moved outside for the photos. The church garden was transformed into a picture-perfect scene, lush flowers lining the paths, a fountain sparkling in the sunlight, and the vibrant colors of everyone's outfits creating a living painting. Guests laughed and chatted as photographers and videographers directed people to stand just so, trying to capture every angle of the day. Keza stayed quietly in the background, letting the photographers do their work. She had no desire to be in the spotlight. She simply wanted to exist in the same space as her family, finally visible after years of being erased. She smiled politely at a few relatives who nodded at her with recognition, keeping her composure even as whispers followed her wherever she moved. Then Solange noticed her standing near the side, close to Emmanuel's family, who were still getting acquainted with the wedding scene. Panic flashed across Solange's face. She had rehearsed this day countless times in her mind, imagining a flawless wedding with no distractions, no reminders of Kaysa's existence. And now, there she was, calm and poised, quietly defying every story Solange had ever told about her. Solange stepped forward, trying to shove Kaysa aside gently at first, her voice low but sharp. "Leave now," she hissed through clenched teeth, leaning close. "I won't let you ruin my perfect day." Her fingers brushed against Kaysa's arm in an almost desperate attempt to move her. Kaysa's expression didn't change. She simply looked at Solange, her eyes calm, almost pitying. "I'm not here to ruin anything," she said softly. "I'm just here." But what neither sister realized in the moment was that the videographer had accidentally captured everything. The camera, aimed for a sweeping shot of the family gathering, had recorded Solange's sharp whisper, her tense body language, and Kaysa's quiet, unshakable composure. A few of Emmanuel's relatives, who had never met Kaysa before, watched the live footage with growing confusion. This wasn't the sweet, obedient, kind sister Solange had described for years. This wasn't the disruptive, jealous, toxic younger sister she had warned them about. No, what they saw was a calm, dignified woman standing her ground while the bride herself acted almost aggressive. Murmurs started to ripple through the group. Heads turned towards Solange as the reality began to seep in. People exchanged confused glances. Someone whispered, "Is this really Solange? That doesn't look very kind," another added under their breath. "And the sister, she looks nothing like what we were told." Kaysa felt the tension but didn't panic. She stayed composed, letting the moment unfold naturally. She realized this was the first crack in Solange's carefully built facade, and she didn't need to push it further. Sometimes, simply showing up and being herself was enough to let the truth begin to speak. Solange, meanwhile, felt a cold panic creeping up her spine. The mask she wore so perfectly for years was starting to slip, and for the first time, she had no idea how to stop it. The day she had planned for months, the perfect day she had imagined, was unraveling before her eyes. All because she had underestimated the quiet strength of the sister she had spent a decade trying to erase. After the lunch and formal photos, it was time for speeches. Guests gathered around the elegantly decorated hall, sipping sparkling juice and chatting excitedly. Solange's maid of honor, her lifelong friend Amina, took the microphone first. She had rehearsed her speech countless times, trying to strike the perfect balance of humor and sentiment. But nerves always have a way of making the tongue slip. She started with compliments and light jokes, making the guests laugh. Then, almost without realizing it, she said something that froze the room for a split second. "Solange has always had to protect us from Kaysa's attention-seeking attitude," she said with a laugh, glancing toward the back of the hall. The words hung in the air like a dropped glass. Guests murmured quietly among themselves. Kaysa, sitting calmly at the edge of the room, felt a strange mix of surprise and vindication. She had heard all of Solange's lies for years, and here, one of Solange's closest friends had just accidentally confirmed them, at least partly. Before anyone could react further, an elderly aunt, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper memory, stood up. Her voice cut through the chatter like a knife. "That girl, Kaysa? She's the one who paid for your school fees." The room went completely silent. Eyes widened, glasses paused midair. Conversation stopped. Even the children seemed to sense the sudden tension. Amina's mouth fell open in shock, realizing instantly what she had just said. Solange, who had been beaming moments before, turned pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Guests began whispering rapidly now. Some leaned toward each other, trying to piece together the revelation. "Wait, she paid for her school fees? I thought Solange did everything herself," another aunt murmured. Another family member added, "I always wondered how Kaysa managed to stay so quiet, yet she seemed so capable." Kaysa stayed still, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone, calm and composed, carried more weight than 1,000 arguments. She had spent years being erased, ignored, and misrepresented, and now, finally, someone had publicly spoken the truth. Solange's face twisted with panic. She opened her mouth as if to interrupt, but no sound came out. Her perfectly crafted image of being the flawless, selfless older sister was beginning to crumble in front of everyone, including Emmanuel's family, who had been largely unaware of the years of deception. The elderly aunt continued, her voice firm. "Kaysa has always been responsible, hardworking, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The gasps in the room grew louder. The first crack in Solange's carefully built wall of lies had appeared, and it wasn't small. It spread quickly, a ripple of disbelief and curiosity passing from guest to guest. People began whispering, questioning, connecting dots they hadn't noticed before. And for the first time that day, Kaysa felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the loud, angry kind, but the quiet, undeniable strength of truth finally stepping into the light. Solange's perfect day, it seemed, was no longer entirely under her control. The hall was still buzzing after the maid of honor's accidental slip, but what happened next turned the tension into something electric. Guests who had been quietly observing began whispering to one another, connecting fragments of the story that Solange had spent years controlling. And slowly, one by one, people started stepping forward. A cousin, who had been sitting near the back, cleared his throat and raised his hand. "I can't stay quiet any longer," he said. All eyes turned toward him. Keza once saved Solange from a huge financial crisis. She paid off debts that could have ruined this family's reputation. And she did it quietly, no fanfare, no thanks. The room murmured in surprise. Solange's smile faltered, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Then an old neighbor, a woman with a gentle face but a commanding presence, stood up. "I've known these girls since they were children," she said. Keza always defended Solange whenever anyone teased her or tried to take advantage of her. She stood up for her sister, even when everyone else ignored the truth. That's the kind of person she is. Her words drew nods from several guests who remembered similar acts of kindness. The ripple of revelations didn't stop there. A former employer, a well-known designer who had worked closely with Keza, stepped forward hesitantly. "I need to set the record straight," he said. "Keza, not Solange, designed the project that won the national award last year. She did all the work, every detail. Solange, she took the credit to impress the family. I never said anything before because I didn't want to cause family drama, but it's time the truth comes out." Whispers turned into gasps. Heads turned toward Solange, whose face had drained of color. Her lips quivered, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap, as if she wanted to vanish. Emmanuel's family exchanged confused glances, the image of the perfect, kind bride cracking in front of them. One by one, others came forward, friends, colleagues, even distant relatives who had seen Keza's quiet generosity and integrity over the years. Each story added weight to the truth, slowly dismantling the false narrative Solange had built so carefully. People laughed softly at the absurdity of some lies, shook their heads in disbelief, and looked at Keza with admiration and newfound respect. Keza stayed calm, listening quietly to each revelation. She didn't interrupt or defend herself. She didn't have to. The truth had begun its work, and no amount of fear or manipulation could stop it. Solange, meanwhile, sat frozen, her carefully curated persona unraveling in real time. Every story, every memory, every word from people who had known the real Keza chipped away at the image she had spent a decade creating. By the time the last guest spoke, the room had shifted completely. Solange's lies were no longer invisible. They were exposed for everyone to see. And in that moment, Keza understood something profound. The truth doesn't need shouting. It only needs a chance to breathe. And finally, after 10 long years, the truth was free. After the wave of revelations, Emmanuel quietly excused himself from the hall. He needed a moment away from the stunned guests, away from the whispers, away from the chaos that Solange's lies had created. He led Solange into a private room near the back of the venue. The moment the door closed, the tension became almost unbearable. Emmanuel's face was serious, his eyes cold and steady. "Solange," he said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk. Now." Solange's perfectly composed mask started to crack. She tried to straighten her posture, tried to summon the calm, confident bride she had rehearsed for months, but it was gone. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her bouquet. "Emmanuel," she began, her voice wavering, I didn't mean for any of this." "You lied," Emmanuel interrupted sharply, his tone leaving no room for excuses. "You lied about your own sister for 10 years. You told everyone she was jealous, irresponsible, toxic, and now we see the truth. What makes you think you won't lie to me too?" Solange froze. Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not. Keza was always the favorite," she whispered, as if confessing the unthinkable. "Everyone loved her more. I had to." "Had to what?" Emmanuel's voice grew colder. "Manipulate your own family? Sabotage your sister's life? Build a fake image for yourself? You're supposed to be my partner, Solange. If you can lie about your own sister, how can I trust anything you say, ever?" Solange couldn't answer. The weight of her lies, of the careful facade she had built for so long, collapsed on her. She stared at the floor, the bouquet slipping from her fingers. For the first time, she realized that the perfect life she imagined, this marriage, this flawless wedding, was crumbling in her hands. Emmanuel shook his head, his expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "I'm going back out there," he said, turning toward the door. "And I want you to stay here until you figure out what truth really means." He walked back into the hall, stepping in front of the stunned guests and the remaining family. Silence fell immediately. Emmanuel lifted his hand to get everyone's attention. "I want to thank Keza," he said loudly, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "Thank you for coming today. Your presence made me see the truth, and I admire your strength." The guests murmured in surprise, some nodding, some whispering praise. Keiza's calm, composed face didn't change. She simply gave a small, polite smile, quietly accepting the recognition without gloating. In the back, Solange couldn't take it anymore. Humiliation burned across her face as she realized how completely exposed she was. Without a word, she turned and stormed out of the hall, her carefully constructed world in pieces, leaving behind whispers and shocked expressions. For the first time that day, Keiza felt a strange sense of relief. The tension in the room had shifted. The lies were gone, the truth was clear, and the sister who had caused so much pain was finally confronted. Not by Keiza, but by the very person she had tried to impress with her deception. The marriage, it seemed, was already cracking before it even began. The hall was silent, the energy heavy with disbelief. Solange had stormed out, Emmanuel had stepped back, and the guests were still trying to process the truth they had just witnessed. In that moment, all eyes slowly turned to Keiza, sitting quietly at the edge of the room. She rose, her movements calm and deliberate, almost serene. There was no anger in her eyes, no need for revenge. She simply stood, letting the room feel her presence. A hush fell over everyone. Even the children stopped whispering. Keiza's posture was perfect but relaxed, her hands folded lightly in front of her. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 10 years of silence and erasure lift slightly from her shoulders. Then, in a voice clear and gentle but carrying authority, she spoke. "I never needed revenge," she said. Her words floated across the hall, soft but impossible to ignore. "I just needed the truth to breathe. That's all." The truth was never loud. It didn't need to be. It only needed to be seen, and finally it has been. The guests exchanged looks, some nodding in understanding, others blinking in surprise. Emmanuel's mother, sitting near the front, stood and slowly walked toward Keiza. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around her in a warm, genuine hug. Keiza's eyes glistened for a moment, but she didn't cry. She only allowed herself to feel the comfort, the acknowledgement she had longed. Extended relatives began to approach her cautiously, some with heads bowed, others with hesitant smiles. "I'm sorry, Keiza," one aunt whispered. "We should have listened to you sooner." Another uncle shook his head, murmuring, "We were wrong to believe everything we were told. You've always been the one who carried yourself with dignity." Keiza's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. She felt a strange, new warmth in her chest, the kind that comes from finally being recognized, finally being understood, finally being seen as she truly was. The whispers about her being difficult or jealous faded into nothing. They didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the truth, and that truth had spoken for itself. Even Emmanuel returned to her side briefly, offering a respectful nod and a quiet word of thanks. There was no need for applause, no need for dramatics. The moment itself held more weight than any grand gesture ever could. Keiza's calm strength had done what words alone could not. For the first time in a decade, she felt truly free. Free from the lies, free from the whispers, free from the shadow of a sister who had tried to erase her. She stood in the center of the room, not as someone fighting back, not as someone proving herself, but simply as Keiza, strong, composed, and seen at last. In that still, charged moment, the guests realized something profound. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands quietly, gracefully, and lets the truth shine for everyone to see. And that was exactly what Keiza did. In the days after the wedding, the consequences of Solange's lies hit hard. Emmanuel took a step back, realizing he could not trust the woman he had planned to marry. The wedding was postponed indefinitely, and gossip spread quickly through family and friends. Solange's carefully built reputation crumbled almost overnight. People began questioning everything she had ever said, and the truth about her deception became impossible to ignore. For the first time, she faced the reality she had worked so hard to hide from. Meanwhile, life for Keiza began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. One of the wedding guests, a well-known entrepreneur who had been quietly observing her grace and humility throughout the event, reached out with an unexpected offer, a major design contract that could transform her career. Keiza accepted, not out of ambition alone, but because it felt like a recognition of her talent and character, qualities she had always quietly cultivated. As news of the wedding incident spread, Keiza's story went viral across East Africa. People shared it online, praising her calm strength, patience, and dignity. Many admired the way she had allowed the truth to reveal itself without anger or revenge. She became an example of silent strength overcoming years of lies and manipulation, a figure of inspiration for those who had been underestimated or erased. In interviews and posts, Keiza often shared the same message. Truth doesn't need noise. It only needs time. It was a lesson she had learned the hard way, but one she now carried with quiet confidence. And finally, with her reputation restored and her future opening up in exciting new ways, Keiza walked forward, not victorious over her sister, not fueled by resentment, but free. Free from the shadow that had followed her for a decade. Free to live her own story, on her own terms at last.